Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Israeli fighter jets have launched air raids on the Gaza Strip, violating the ceasefire yet again. The Israeli Defense Forces allege the attacks were in response to incendiary balloons launched from the enclave. Meanwhile, a Hamas spokesperson says the bombing is a demonstrative show by the new Israeli government. Somalia's army says it has killed 30 AL-SHABAAB militants in the Jalable area of the SHABELLE region. In a tweet, the army said at least 24 other militants were injured during the operation. It said the troops also foiled an attack by the militants on an army base. Iranians are voting to elect a new president on Friday. Hardline Judiciary Chief Ibrahim Raisi and moderate former Central Bank Governor Abdul Nasir HEMMATI are the main contenders. India has reported nearly 1,600 deaths from COVID-19 and over 62,000 cases in the past 24 hours. Pakistan's positivity rate has fallen below 2% as the country logged 39 fatalities and over 1,000 cases overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.8 million lives and infected nearly 177 million people so far. These were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Israeli fighter jets have launched air raids on the Gaza Strip, violating the ceasefire yet again. The Israeli Defense Forces allege the attacks were in response to incendiary balloons launched from the enclave.
The missiles hit sites belonging to resistance groups northwest of Gaza City and north of Beit Lahia. A civil administration building east of Jabalia in the north was also targeted. IDF also attacked an agriculture field east of the southern town of Khan Yunis. Hamas says the bombing is a demonstrative show by the new Israeli government. Spokesperson Fawzi Barhom vowed to continue defending the Palestinian people and land. No casualties were reported immediately in the aftermath of the raid. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid. The State Department says they discussed the need to improve Israeli-Palestinian relations in practical ways.
Now, Somalia's army says it has killed 30 Al-Shabaab militants in the Jalable area of the Shabelle region. In a tweet, the army said at least 24 other militants were injured during the operation. It said the troops also foiled an attack by the militants on an army base. Earlier this week, at least 15 people were killed in a suicide bombing in the capital, Mogadishu. Al-Shabaab wants to unseat the government, frequently carries out such bombings. Now, Iranians are voting to elect a new president today. The poll comes after 3 years of economic hardship under U.S. sanctions. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei urged the people to participate in the electoral process after casting his vote in Tehran. Hardline Judiciary Chief Ibrahim Raisi and moderate former Central Bank Governor Abdul Nasir HEMMATI are the main contenders. Raisi is a close ally of Khamenei and is favourite to succeed the incumbent Hassan Rouhani. More than 59 million Iranians are eligible to vote. Official opinion polls suggest turnout could be as low as 44%, significantly lower than in the past elections. The results are expected around midday on Saturday. Now, North Korea says it needs to prepare for both dialogue and confrontation with the U.S., particularly the latter. Speaking at a meeting of senior leaders in Pyongyang, leader Kim Jong-un called for a sharp and prompt response to any developments. State media says Kim presented an analysis of the Biden administration's North Korea policy at the plenary. He pledged to protect Korea's dignity and interests, guaranteeing a peaceful environment. The North Korean leader also laid out a strategic and tactical plan to deal with Washington. Earlier this year, Pyongyang accused the U.S. of going back on its commitments and said it would not engage in more talks. Now, Russia's President Vladimir Putin says the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan is a very important issue for Moscow. In a meeting in Moscow, Putin said Afghanistan has a common border with Tajikistan, where Russia has its military base. He noted Tajikistan is also a member of the Russia-led military bloc Collective Security Treaty Organization. He said Moscow's approach towards regional countries would depend on the situation in Afghanistan. Putin confirmed that he also discussed the withdrawal of U.S. troops with President Joe Biden in Geneva. Now, the U.S. House of Representatives has introduced a bill to speed up the processing of special immigration visas for Afghan workers. The legislation is for the Afghans at risk of Taliban retribution because they worked for the United States. The bill will raise the number of visas available for qualifying Afghans to 19,000. The 12-year-old program has been plagued by processing delays due to personnel shortages at the U.S. Embassy and other issues. The new bill would eliminate requirements as seen as impeding the application process. In a statement, Democrat Jason Crow said it is time for the U.S. to honor its promises and protect its Afghan partners. Earlier, Washington said President Joe Biden and Tayyip Erdogan have agreed that Turkey will take a lead role in securing Kabul airport. Pakistan has reaffirmed its unwavering support to the legitimate cause of the Palestinians for their right to self-determination. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi met his Palestinian counterpart on the sidelines of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. Qureshi said peace in the Middle East can only be achieved through a two-state solution. He shared Pakistan's efforts for a resolution of the Palestine crisis with Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki. Qureshi reaffirmed Islamabad's support for an independent Palestinian state with pre-1967 borders. He also invited al-Maliki to visit Pakistan, which the Palestinian Foreign Minister accepted. Pakistan has reiterated its commitment to play its role in consolidating Asia's strengths. The Foreign Office made these remarks on the 19th anniversary of the establishment of the Asia Cooperation Dialogue. In a tweet, spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chowdhury said Islamabad will work to fortify Asia's competitiveness. Islamabad also pledged to promote interdependence and connectivity across the region. Pakistan is a founding member of the Asia Cooperation Dialogue. Now, Brazil has registered more than 2,000 deaths from COVID-19 and over 74,000 infections overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.8 million lives and infected nearly 177 million people so far. More details about the pandemic in this report.
The vaccination supply glitches, skepticism and new variants continue complicating the fight against COVID-19. The US says it will finish allocating 80 million shots in the coming days, with shipments going out as soon as the countries are ready to receive them. England's Wales region is delaying further easing of restrictions for 4 weeks after seeing a spike in cases of the Delta variant first identified in India. Similarly, in Australia, New South Wales has made face masks mandatory on public transport in Sydney. Meanwhile, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern received her first shot of the vaccine as the country steps up efforts to inoculate its population.
For me, we needed to get those frontline workers, but I also need to be a role model and just demonstrate that it's safe, that it's effective, and that it's really important that everyone's vaccinated when they have their opportunities. So it's about finding the right balance.
South Korea has announced to offer Pfizer dose to some 760,000 people who received the first dose of AstraZeneca due to shipment delays by COVAX. In Japan, corporate giants are joining national vaccination efforts as the government struggles to meet its inoculation targets. Meanwhile, Tokyo residents are concerned over the government's decision to ease the state of emergency in the capital and other areas.
Tokyo It is so obvious that they are lifting the state of emergency only to hold the Tokyo Olympics. They cannot even hide that, and it makes me very frustrated. We worked so hard to bring down the COVID-19 cases, but what's the point if we invite people to come from overseas?
In India, nearly 1,600 people lost their lives to the virus and over 62,000 tested positive in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, Nepal has significantly reduced infections after its worst outbreak but is in desperate need of vaccines.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 39 more have died of COVID-19, while just over 1,000 tested positive in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the country's positivity rate has declined to 1.9%. The ministry said the death toll is approaching 22,000. It said out of over 946,000 cases, more than 888,000 people have recovered. There are nearly 36,000 active cases, over 2,400 of them are in critical condition. The ministry said the country has administered almost 12.5 million vaccine doses so far. Moving on, Afghanistan and Kazakhstan have signed a military cooperation agreement. Kabul's National Security Advisor Hamdullah Mohib and Kazakh Defense Minister Nur Yilan signed the deal. The agreement involves collaboration in joint military exercises, including the renovation of equipment. Kabul and Nur Sultan also agreed on training, medical and intelligence cooperation. Now, Beijing has rejected a U.S. vote to advance the proposed ban on Chinese tech giants Huawei and ZTE. Earlier, the U.S. Federal Communications Commission voted unanimously to ban approvals for Chinese equipment in American telecom networks. In a press briefing, China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said the U.S. abuses national security. He said Washington suppresses Chinese companies without any evidence. The spokesperson urged the U.S. to stop politicizing economic issues. In March, the FCC designated 5 Chinese companies, including tech giants Huawei and ZTE, as a national security threat. The Commission can now also revoke prior equipment authorizations issued to Chinese companies. Now, the UN General Assembly is set to vote on a non-binding resolution condemning the military regime in Myanmar. Diplomats say the resolution also calls on member states to curb the flow of arms into the violence-racked country. The text is co-sponsored by over 50 countries and calls on the military to allow UN envoy Christine Schraner Burgener to visit Myanmar. It asks for the implementation of a 5-point plan drafted by ASEAN in April, including the naming of an envoy from the grouping. The vote on resolution comes on the same day that the Security Council holds informal talks on the situation in Myanmar. Meanwhile, protests against the military regime continue in Yangon and Sagaing region. Many countries have promised to help Lebanon's army amid a political and economic crisis. The US, Russia, China, as well as European powers and some Gulf states pledged support in a virtual meeting organized by France. Lebanese Army Chief Joseph Aoun said the nation faces dire consequences if military salaries continue to tumble. Speaking at the meeting, he said all state institutions will collapse, including the Lebanese armed forces, without help. Diplomats say not much was offered during the meeting, although the majority of countries showed readiness to offer bilateral support in the future. Paris has so far failed to push Lebanon's politicians to form a new government that is vital to unlock foreign aid. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, in Nigeria, armed attackers have killed a police officer, abducted 5 teachers and more than 80 students. A teacher at the school said the kidnapped students mostly include girls. The attack took place at a federal government college in the remote town in the northwestern state of Kebbi. It is the 3rd assault by armed gangs on a school or college in Nigeria in less than a month. A spokesman for the police said a student was also shot and is receiving medical treatment. Authorities said security forces are searching a nearby forest for the abducted students and teachers. More than 700 of children and students have already been kidnapped by different gangs for ransom since December. Now, in Honduras, 5 inmates have been killed in a brawl at a high-security prison east of the capital, Tegucigalpa. Authorities say 39 inmates and guards were injured during the clash, which involved the use of live ammunition and grenades. Prosecutor Sarah Gomez said 13 people are in critical condition. The brawl began when members of the Barrio 18 gang entered a section for members of the rival Mara Salvatrucha 13 gang. According to the prison authorities, the facility houses more than 1,500 inmates. Prisons in Honduras have been under military control since the end of 2019. Now, torrential rains have lashed Mexico's southern city of Jutitan in Oaxaca, causing a river to overflow. Streets turn to rivers and authorities say about 1,000 homes are flooded. As floodwaters slowly recede, local authorities and residents are coming together to clean up the streets. They are trying to stop the spread of disease in this small city. Residents are bracing for further floods, with heavy rains predicted to go on until next week. Now, most European stocks have edged lower as global markets monitor falling commodity prices. London's FTSE has lost the most, dipping close to 0.5%. Italy's FTSE MIB and Frankfurt's DAX have slipped marginally, while the pan-European stock 600 shed fractionally. But bucking the trend, the CAC 40 in Paris has edged up slightly. Earlier, most Asian stocks traded mixed. And now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the world. And that is the end of this news bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.